So, 5 Neuro-Tools for acceptance and surrender. So, number one is notice what you do and do not have the power to change. And notice when you're focusing on the things that you don't, because that is a way that we beat ourselves up, as though we do have that power. And we don't. With many things, we don't have the power to change them. So note recognizing those things, um, and write them down if you find that it's difficult. If you tend to dwell or you're ruminating on it a lot, write it down. I do not have the power to change whatever it is. So then notice resistance. Notice resistance in the body and in the mind. When we find resistance, when we notice us resisting, just accepting that this is how things are, you find yourself fighting against that, right? Um, this is with just within yourself, and it has to literally be things that you can't change, right? Because sometimes there are things we can do, and it's good to hone in on where we do have the power to change things, right? That helps us feel empowered that we can do this. And but when you notice resistance coming at any time, just gently, gently invite it to soften. And this is where safety can help, right? Practicing the cave of safety, either as a meditation practice or just as a brain exercise, right? That can create the support that we need to accept the most painful things. And I know this well, right? I felt like I was having to choke down acceptance, and it was to accept the unacceptable. How do you accept the unacceptable? It's recognizing you can't change it and seeing places where you can affect change, right? That helps you feel empowered. But noticing when we're resisting it, like just the internal tightening and resistance to it, and just gently bring in some gentle softening. And again, back to the cave of safety, you can give yourself that reassurance that it's okay, that you can soften. Because refusing to accept doesn't change anything. Refusing to accept the reality of the things we face in life, it just increases the resistance. And so we often need that support to accept the most unacceptable things, because we cannot go back in time. We cannot change the past. We can affect change in the future, but to do that, we have to accept what is and recognize that we waste our time trying to ruminate about what we can't change. And so again, so practice the cave of safety to have that additional layer of support for accepting and surrendering to the reality of what is. Quick note that acceptance and surrender practices are not appropriate for people living with suicidal ideation. That can be something that can activate that and make it worse, and it's risky and dangerous. So don't do that work right now if you're living with that. Work to get stabilized first. If you have some big things that you have to do work with around acceptance, okay, but do that with a therapist. Don't try to do that on your own. So beyond the caveat, for people who are just dealing with normal shitty things that we have to accept, even abnormal shitty things that we have to accept, that's different than suicidal ideation. So if you live with suicidal ideation, go to that page on this site. And if it's not up yet, that's because I'm reworking it, and it will be up soon. And reach out to me if you're unsure. I can help you tease some of that out. But again, default to your therapist. And then, so after noticing resistance and trying to bring in some softening, practicing the cave of safety to establish safety for yourself, when things are really difficult, we need like this additional layer and this very safe space to do this work in. But practicing allowing, right? Allowing is the antidote to resistance. So when you notice resistance coming up, trying to gently bring in some softening, trying to gently bring in allowing, right? And you can increase that through practicing mindfulness, which again does not have to be in meditation. You could practice mindfulness just as a brain exercise. And so learn about that, go to the information about mindfulness, and you can follow those steps, but in whatever way you choose. Um, but practicing that allowing things to come up and emerge, to be seen. Often things we're struggling to accept, they need to be seen, they need to be felt, they need to be mourned, right? This, whatever loss you've had, or whatever change, or whatever reality you have had to accept, it can help us soften into being able to be more fluid, right? And when you're in a state of non-acceptance, um, that's the opposite of allowing. And so working with allowing can increase your ability to accept and just surrender to what is. Often what is can lead to depression. So you want to work with, okay, if I don't like what is within my power, right? Going back to that first, recognizing what you do and don't have the power to do and have control over. So mostly that's over self, right? We have very little power to control things outside of ourselves. Um, but bringing that allowing, it softens things, it softens the resistance. So and that, eh, taking steps to do the things that you can do, that is empowering, right? Because then we're not focused on all the things that we have no power over. Practicing quiet mind is helpful for acceptance and surrender, letting go. um, Quiet mind, when we're in resistance, that tends to be a fairly activated state, right? We're in a defense state, and quiet mind can help soften that and quiet the system down and bring it more into a calm awareness, right? With quiet mind, you're not trying to fall asleep. I mean, you can use it to prepare for sleep, but within it, you're just building the observer, right? The observer who can see all these things. And like the wise old you in the cave of safety, it can fill you with this sense of that you can get through it, that you will get through this. And when you can quiet the system down and build that calm observer, that increases our sense of being able to be fluid, being able to accept even the worst things. Choosing not to accept the things that are makes it harder. And acceptance doesn't mean, and surrender doesn't, it's not like this isn't about like a literal thing with like surrendering to a person, right? Because that's not the same context. This is about noticing the things that we're resisting, right? Sometimes we can't accept. And then you'll notice problems with resistance. You're resisting it. And that's okay. You can't do the work of acceptance and surrender until you're ready. And that is sometimes a long process and one that requires a lot of support to get to. So again, talk to a therapist about what you're experiencing, what things you're noticing, about resistance and if you're what you're resisting, what you're struggling to accept, to even tease out what you do and don't have control over. So, so spend some time in the cave of safety, practice allowing, practicing quieting the mind and the system, noticing the resistance when it comes, choosing to bring in some softening and some a little more fluidity to flow through these experiences. Because when we fight against them, they become much harder. Now, a good fight against things that should not. When we have something we can change, yeah, put effort there because that feels good and it feels empowering, right? And often when we are struggling to accept something or we've had something difficult happen to us, it can be very disempowering. So work with these things. And again, talk to your therapist because they can help you tease out some of the ways that our ways of thinking can cause and generate that resistance. So, so seek that out, seek out, hunt for the resistance. And where you notice it, bring in some comfort, bring in some soothing, breathing in some solace, bring in some softening. And there,